The rain pounded against the dirt road, turning it into a muddy river as Ryder Morgan pulled his hat lower over his eyes, squinting through the downpour. He hadn't expected to find anyone out in this storm, much less a woman sitting alone on a bench outside the Silver Creek General Store, her shoulders hunched against the deluge, her once fine dress now sodden and clinging to her slender frame. Something about her struck him, a memory distant but clear as crystal. Those auburn curls now darkened by rain, he knew them. Even before she lifted her face, he knew who she was. Annabelle Shaw, his first love. The girl who had stolen his heart when they were just children. The one whose father had whisked her away to Boston for a proper life when she was 16. That had been 7 years ago. Without hesitation, Ryder strode across the muddy street, shrugging off his heavy duster coat as he approached. She didn't notice him at first, her gaze fixed on some distant point, her thoughts clearly miles away. "Miss Shaw," he said softly, her head snapped up, green eyes widening in recognition. "Ryder Morgan." He laid his coat gently across her shoulders, his calloused fingers brushing against the delicate fabric of her dress. A smile spread across his weather-worn face as he tipped his hat. "Looks like you could use this more than me." "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the edges of the coat closer to her body. "I didn't think anyone would remember me here." "Some people are impossible to forget," he replied, his voice barely audible above the drumming rain. It was 1876, and Silver Creek, Colorado had changed since she'd left. The railroad had come through, bringing with it prosperity and trouble in equal measure. Ryder had changed to no longer the lanky 16-year-old boy with dreams bigger than the sky, but a man now, hardened by years working cattle and occasionally his gun when necessary. "May I?" He gestured to the space beside her on the bench. She nodded, shifting slightly to make room. "I suppose the rain has us both trapped for the moment. What brings you back to Silver Creek?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual though his heart hammered in his chest. Annabelle's eyes lowered, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. "My father passed away 3 months ago, consumption. I've come to start over." "I'm sorry to hear about your father," Ryder said sincerely, despite the fact that Cornelius Shaw had never approved of him, had called him that ranch hand's boy with thinly veiled disdain. "Thank you," she replied softly. "And you? Did you become the cattle baron you always dreamed of being?" Ryder chuckled, the sound warm against the cold rain. "Not quite. I've got a small spread about 10 miles out, enough to get by." The rain began to ease, transitioning from a torrent to a gentle patter. Annabelle made no move to return his coat, and Ryder made no move to ask for it back. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" he asked. "The Willow Creek Inn, though I've yet to check in. My trunk should have arrived yesterday." Ryder stood, offering his hand. "Allow me to escort you. These streets get mighty slick after a rain like this." Annabelle hesitated only a moment before placing her gloved hand in his. The touch, even through the fabric, sent a jolt through him that he hadn't felt in 7 years. "I would appreciate that," she said, rising to her feet with the grace he remembered so well. As they walked down the muddy Main Street, Ryder couldn't help stealing glances at her profile. She'd grown more beautiful, if that was possible. The girl he'd known had blossomed into a woman of refinement and poise, yet there was something in her eyes, a weariness, perhaps even a sadness that hadn't been there before. "Boston didn't agree with you," he ventured. A small, bitter smile played at her lips. "Boston society didn't agree with me. Father had such grand plans. Finishing school, a suitable marriage. I was to be Mrs. Theodore Blackstone by now. And yet here you are in Silver Creek." "And yet here I am," she echoed. "Theodore decided a banker's daughter with a larger dowry would make a more fitting wife." Ryder's jaw tightened. Then Theodore is a fool. They reached the Willow Creek Inn, a two-story structure that was the pride of Silver Creek, with its painted shutters and actual glass windows. Annabelle paused at the bottom of the steps, turning to face him. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Morgan," she said formally, beginning to remove his coat. "Keep it," he said quickly. "At least until tomorrow. I'll call on you then if that's acceptable. Perhaps show you how the town has changed." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, warmth, maybe even hope. "I would like that." Ryder tipped his hat again, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Until tomorrow, Miss Shaw." He watched her ascend the steps, his coat still draped around her shoulders, before turning to make his way back to where his horse was hitched. The rain had stopped completely now, and a beam of late-afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the puddles in the street to gold. For the first time since she'd left, Ryder Morgan allowed himself to hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Ryder spent more time than usual on his appearance, trimming his beard and putting on his best shirt, the blue one his sister Ruth had sent him from Denver last Christmas. He rode into town earlier than necessary, stopping first at Hattie's flower shop where he purchased a small bouquet of wildflowers. Hattie raised an eyebrow but mercifully asked no questions. At precisely 10 o'clock, he found himself outside the Willow Creek Inn, flowers in hand, hat in the other. When Annabelle emerged onto the porch, he nearly forgot to breathe. She wore a simple day dress of sky blue, her auburn hair pinned up, but with a few rebellious curls framing her face. His duster coat was folded neatly over her arm. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Miss Shaw," he replied, presenting the flowers with a slight bow. "I thought you might enjoy these. They grow wild on my property." Her eyes softened as she accepted them. "They're beautiful, thank you." She handed him his coat. "And thank you for this as well. It was most gallant of you." "Nothing gallant about it," he said with a shrug. "Just couldn't stand to see you sitting there getting soaked." They began walking down the main street, Annabelle tucking her hand into the crook of his arm as naturally as if they'd been doing it for years. "So, what shall we see first?" she asked. "Show me what's changed." "Well, the railroad came through in '71, Ryder said, gesturing toward the tracks visible at the far end of town. "Brought prosperity to some, headaches to others. We've got a proper schoolhouse now, and Doc Adams finally got himself a real surgery instead of working out of his home." As they walked, Ryder pointed out the new establishments: the telegraph office, the hotel that had replaced the old boarding house, the millinery where ladies could order hats from catalogs featuring the latest Eastern fashions, and Thompson's old livery. Annabelle asked, referring to the business once owned by Ryder's mentor. A shadow passed over Ryder's face. "Sold to the Prescott brothers after Thompson passed on. They're fair men, though. Kept me on for a while before I saved enough to buy my own place." They stopped for lunch at the Silver Spoon Cafe, where Annabelle attracted curious glances from the locals. Silver Creek wasn't so big that a new face, especially one as striking as hers, went unnoticed. "I feel like I'm being studied," she murmured over her bowl of stew. "Small town," Ryder shrugged. "They're just trying to figure out why the prettiest girl in Colorado is having lunch with the likes of me." A blush crept up her cheeks. "You always did have a silver tongue, Ryder Morgan. Only speaking the truth, Annabelle Shaw." After lunch, they visited the general store where Annabelle purchased a few necessities for her room at the inn. As they were leaving, they nearly collided with a well-dressed man entering the store. "Annabelle," the man exclaimed, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Annabelle stiffened beside Ryder. "Alexander, I didn't expect to see you here." Alexander Prescott, the elder of the Prescott brothers, removed his hat and gave a slight bow. "I could say the same. Last I heard, you were the belle of Boston society." "Circumstances change," she replied coolly. Alexander's gaze shifted to Ryder, his expression cooling several degrees. "Morgan." "Prescott," Ryder returned with a curt nod. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them before Alexander cleared his throat. "Well, I won't keep you. A pleasure to see you again, Annabelle. Perhaps we could catch up properly sometime." "Perhaps," she said non-committally. As Alexander disappeared into the store, Annabelle let out a long breath. "I had forgotten he was here." "Hard to forget the Prescotts," Ryder said dryly. "They own half the town these days. We were acquainted before I left for Boston," Annabelle explained hesitantly. "Father had hoped there might be a match." Something cold settled in Ryder's stomach. The Prescotts had been wealthy even before the railroad, their cattle operation one of the largest in the territory. Of course, Cornelius Shaw would have encouraged such a match. "I see," was all he said. They continued their tour in slightly strained silence until they reached the edge of town where the old church stood. It was here, beneath the ancient oak tree in the churchyard, that 16-year-old Ryder had first kissed 14-year-old Annabelle, a lifetime ago. She paused, gazing up at the tree's spreading branches. "It's bigger than I remember." 7 years of growing," Ryder said softly. Their eyes met, and in that moment the years seemed to fall away. They were just two young people again, with hearts full of dreams and possibilities. "Why didn't you write?" The words escaped before Ryder could stop them. Annabelle's eyes widened. "I did write, for months. You never answered." Confusion clouded Ryder's features. "I never received any letters, Annabelle." Understanding dawned on her face, followed by a flash of anger. "Father, he must have. He never sent them." Ryder's jaw tightened. "And I thought you'd simply forgotten about Silver Creek, about me." "Never," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. "Not for a single day." The ride back to the Willow Creek Inn was quiet, both lost in thoughts of what might have been if letters had been delivered, if fathers hadn't interfered, if life had taken different turns. "Thank you for today," Annabelle said as they stood on the inn's porch, "for showing me the town." "My pleasure," Ryder replied. "Would you? That is, I'm wondering if you might like to come out to my ranch sometime, see the place, meet my horses." A genuine smile lit up her face. "I would like that very much. Sunday, perhaps. I could pick you up after church." "Sunday it is," she agreed. Ryder hesitated, then took her hand, bringing it briefly to his lips. "Until then, Miss Shaw." As he rode back to his ranch that evening, Ryder's mind was full of auburn hair and green eyes, of lost years and new beginnings. He had never expected to see Annabelle Shaw again, had forced himself to accept that their childhood romance was nothing more than a sweet memory. Now, against all odds, she was back, and the feeling in his chest when she smiled at him that hadn't changed at all. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. The following days passed in a blur for Ryder. There were fences to mend, cattle to move to fresh pasture, a lame horse to tend to. Yet through it all, his thoughts kept returning to Annabelle. On Saturday, he made a special trip into town for supplies and found himself lingering outside the Willow Creek Inn, hoping for a glimpse of her. His patience was rewarded when she emerged, accompanied by none other than Alexander Prescott. They were deep in conversation, Alexander leaning in close as he spoke, Annabelle nodding periodically. Ryder watched from across the street, a familiar jealousy curling in his gut. As a boy, he'd always known he couldn't compete with the Prescott fortune. As a man, he still couldn't offer her the kind of life Alexander could. Just as he was about to turn away, Annabelle looked up and spotted him. Her face brightened immediately, and she said something to Alexander before crossing the street toward Ryder. "What a pleasant surprise," she said, slightly breathless. "I was just telling Alexander about your invitation tomorrow." "Were you now?" Ryder replied, trying to keep his tone light. He was kind enough to offer me a tour of his family's ranch as well, but I informed him I already had a standing engagement. A small, petty part of Ryder was pleased by this, though he tried not to show it. "I wouldn't want to interfere with your social calendar." Annabelle tilted her head, studying him. "Are you jealous, Ryder Morgan? Should I be?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Not in the slightest." Relief washed over him, followed by embarrassment at his childish reaction. "I apologize." "It's not my place to, it's exactly your place," she interrupted softly. "At least, I hope it might be." Their eyes met, and the street around them seemed to fade away. Ryder had the sudden, overwhelming urge to kiss her right there in broad daylight, propriety be damned. The moment was broken by Alexander calling Annabelle's name from across the street. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "He's escorting me to the mercantile to select fabric for curtains. I've decided to rent the small cottage behind Mrs. Peterson's boarding house." "You're staying in Silver Creek, then?" Ryder couldn't keep the hope from his voice. "It appears so," she replied with a soft smile. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Morgan." "Until tomorrow," he echoed, watching her return to Alexander's side. As Ryder rode home, his mood was considerably lighter. She was staying in Silver Creek. She had chosen to tour his modest ranch over the Prescott Empire. Perhaps there was hope after all. Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect June day. Ryder attended church for the first time in months, ignoring the surprised glances from townsfolk when he slipped into a pew at the back. His eyes sought out Annabelle immediately, finding her seated near the front, her auburn hair gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. After the service, he waited outside, hat in hand, while she exchanged pleasantries with several older women who had known her as a girl. When she finally broke free and approached him, the smile on her face was worth every minute of waiting. "Ready for that tour?" he asked, offering his arm. "More than ready," she replied, taking it. He helped her into his wagon, keenly aware of the curious eyes watching them. Silver Creek would be buzzing with gossip by sundown, but Ryder found he didn't much care. The ride to his ranch took just under an hour, during which they talked easily about their childhoods, shared memories of simpler times. Ryder carefully avoided asking about her years in Boston, and she seemed equally content to leave those experiences unexamined. When they crested the final hill and his property came into view, Ryder felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. His ranch was small by Colorado standards, a neat cabin, a sturdy barn, corrals, and about 50 head of cattle grazing in the distance. Nothing like the Prescott spread with its grand house and hundreds of acres. "It's not much," he began apologetically. "It's beautiful," Annabelle breathed, her eyes taking in the vista. "Truly, Ryder, you've built something wonderful here." Her sincere admiration eased his concerns. He guided the wagon down the hill toward the cabin, pointing out features of the land as they went: the creek that never ran dry, the south pasture where the grass grew tallest, the stand of pines that sheltered the property from the worst of the winter winds. "And this," he said as they pulled up before the cabin, "is home." It was a simple structure, built by Ryder's own hands with help from neighboring ranchers. 2 rooms, sturdy log walls, a stone chimney, and a small covered porch where he'd placed a bench for watching sunsets. Annabelle's eyes shone as she looked around. "You did all this yourself?" "Most of it," he admitted. "Had help with the roof and chimney." He showed her the vegetable garden behind the cabin, introduced her to his horses, especially his prized stallion, Thunder, and proudly pointed out the new calf born just 3 days prior. They ate lunch on the porch, A simple meal of cold chicken, bread, and apple pie that Mrs. Holloway at the cafe had packed for them. Annabelle seemed genuinely content, more relaxed than he'd seen her since her return. "You know," she said, looking out over the rolling grassland, "this reminds me of the picnics we used to have by Miller's Creek." "I remember," Ryder smiled. "You'd always bring those little lemon cakes your mother made. And you'd bring your father's spyglass so we could look for eagles." The mention of his father sobered Ryder slightly. He would have liked to see this place. Always said a man needs his own piece of sky. "He was right," Annabelle said softly. "Your father was a wise man." "Wiser than I gave him credit for," Ryder admitted. "I was so eager to make my own way that I didn't appreciate his advice until it was too late." Annabelle reached over, placing her hand gently on his. "He would be proud of you, Ryder, of the man you've become." The warmth of her touch, the sincerity in her eyes, it was almost more than Ryder could bear. Without thinking, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as gentle as the summer breeze but filled with 7 years of longing. For a heart-stopping moment, she didn't respond, and Ryder feared he'd overstepped. But then her hand came up to cup his cheek, and she was kissing him back with a fervor that matched his own. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Annabelle's cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you in the rain," Ryder confessed. "I've wanted you to do that since I was 16 years old," she replied, a smile playing at her lips. They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the property, talking about everything and nothing. Ryder showed her the small orchard he'd started, the wild strawberry patch he'd discovered last summer, the perfect spot by the creek for fishing. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, they sat side by side on the porch bench, Ryder's arm around Annabelle's shoulders. "I should get you back to town before it gets dark," he said reluctantly. Annabelle nodded, though she made no move to rise. "This has been the most perfect day." "The first of many, I hope," Ryder replied, turning to face her. "Annabelle, I know it's sudden you've only been back a week, but I never stopped caring for you. Even when I thought you'd forgotten all about Silver Creek and everyone in it, I couldn't forget you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Nor I you. Boston was difficult. Father pushed me toward matches he deemed suitable, but my heart was always here." Ryder took her hands in his. "I can't offer you what the Prescotts can, no grand house or fine carriages. But everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it." A tear slipped down her cheek as she smiled. "What I want, Ryder Morgan, is a man who will lay his coat across my shoulders when it rains. The rest is just details." The ride back to Silver Creek was quiet but comfortable, their hands entwined on the wagon seat between them. Ryder felt a contentment he hadn't known in years, perhaps ever. They agreed to take things slowly. Annabelle would move into her rented cottage, establish herself in the community once more, and they would court properly. "I want to do this right," Ryder told her as they pulled up outside the Willow Creek Inn. "No rushing, no scandals. You deserve better than whispered gossip." "Always the gentleman," she teased, though her eyes were warm with appreciation. He helped her down from the wagon, holding her hand perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "May I call on you Tuesday evening? Perhaps take you to dinner at the hotel?" "I would like that very much," she replied. As July turned to August, their courtship became the talk of Silver Creek. They attended church together on Sundays, took walks in the evenings, and shared meals at the cafe. Ryder helped Annabelle settle into her cottage, building shelves for her books and a window box for flowers. Alexander Prescott continued his own pursuit, sending flowers and stopping by the cottage with various pretexts. Annabelle was unfailingly polite but firm in her refusals of his invitations. "He doesn't take rejection well," she confided to Ryder one evening as they sat on her small porch. "He's used to getting what he wants." "So am I," Ryder replied with a grin, stealing a quick kiss. August brought the county fair, where Ryder's stallion took first prize in the racing category. The purse wasn't large, but the recognition meant that several ranchers approached him about breeding rights, a potential new source of income for his modest operation. "You'll be a cattle baron yet," Annabelle teased as they celebrated with lemonade and fresh gingerbread. "Not interested in being a baron," he replied. "Just want enough to provide for a family someday." The look they exchanged was full of promise. As summer faded into autumn, their bond only strengthened. Annabelle found work teaching at the schoolhouse when Mrs. Harper retired, and Ryder's breeding business began to flourish alongside his cattle operation. It was a crisp October evening when he finally asked the question that had been on his mind for months. They were sitting by the creek on his property, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Annabelle," he began, his voice unusually serious, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." She turned to him, her green eyes soft in the fading light. "Mine as well. I've been thinking about the future, our future." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he passed, said I should save it for when I found a woman worthy of it." From the pouch, he produced a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond. Nothing ostentatious, nothing to rival what Alexander Prescott could offer, but a symbol of generations of Morgan love and commitment. "Annabelle Shaw, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. "Yes," she finally managed. "Oh, Ryder, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his own hands trembling slightly, before pulling her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Their wedding was held the first Sunday in December, with snow dusting the ground and holly decorating the small church. The townspeople turned out in force, most genuinely happy for the couple, though Alexander Prescott was notably absent. Annabelle wore her mother's wedding dress, altered and updated by the skilled hands of Mrs. Peterson. Ryder wore a new suit ordered from Denver, feeling somewhat constrained by the formal attire, but willing to endure it for the occasion. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed his bride with such tenderness that several of the older women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "Mrs. Morgan," he whispered against her lips. "I like the sound of that," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. That winter was harsh, with blizzards sweeping across the plains and temperatures dropping to record lows. But inside the cabin, now brightened by Annabelle's touch with curtains, quilts, and small treasures from her previous life, warmth and love abounded. They settled into a rhythm, Annabelle continuing to teach while Ryder tended to the ranch. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other by lamplight, planned expansions to the cabin, and dreamed of the children they hoped would come. Spring arrived late but glorious, the land awakening with wildflowers and new calves. Annabelle planted an expanded vegetable garden and began keeping chickens, delighting in the simple routines of ranch life. It was an afternoon in early May when she met Ryder at the door with news that would change their lives forever. "Ryder," she said, her face alight with joy, "we're going to have a baby." The exuberant whoop he let out could probably be heard all the way to Silver Creek. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you all right? Should you be resting? Do we need to fetch the doctor?" Annabelle laughed, pressing a hand to his cheek. "I'm perfectly fine. The baby isn't due until November." That evening they sat on their porch bench, watching the sunset just as they had the day he proposed. Ryder's arm was around his wife's shoulders, his other hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Are you happy, Annabelle?" he asked softly. "Truly happy? This life is so different from what you knew in Boston." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "I have never been happier in my life, Ryder Morgan. This is where I belong, where we belong." As if to emphasize her words, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering on the porch roof above them. Ryder immediately shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders, just as he had that day in Silver Creek when she'd returned to his life. "Always the gentleman," she murmured, echoing her words from months ago. "Always your gentleman," he corrected, pulling her closer as they watched the rain fall over their land, their home, their future. And in that moment, as the sun's last rays pierced the rain clouds, turning the droplets to gold, Ryder Morgan knew with absolute certainty that the best decision he'd ever made was laying his coat across the shoulders of the woman he'd never stopped loving.